Cradle, The Rise of the Chosen, Chapter 14, Part 1. They bypassed the waterlogged border area, and Takuma led them to a larger hut, and one of the more robustly built ones, and he knew he'd find a good number of the villagers fleeing from the high waters. The ground was thick and muddy, and it had a smell of damp tree bark and urine. He guessed there weren't too many places to go now with the storm. The rain was slamming him and Gianoa until they stepped inside the hut on the door stone that was wet and somehow felt greasy. The people were silent and huddled in the dark. The whites of their eyes gave Takuma a slight chill. Those with parkas on looked hunched over as they sat or squatted on the dirt floor. Those without jackets or parkas looked frigid and shivered every once in a while. Takuma guessed there was no fire because all the wood was soaked. He noticed how incredibly loud outside was and then gathered his thoughts. "Yumchi, Achia?" Takuma asked. No one answered at first, and he didn't know if it was because they recognized him or if they didn't recognize him. Gianoa stepped to his side. "Sietara, Yumchi, Achia, I'm here to help." "Are there more?" he repeated. An elderly man with sunken cheeks and bug eyes said, "Yitlu, Uyetoi, Riklui, Iju. We're all separated. We just fled from the rain." Takuma looked around the large, dim room and guessed there had to be 75 people crammed inside. Going by a ratio theory, he believed that this hut probably constituted 25% of the survivors. So, that would work for what was in his deeper mind, and mind that he was beginning to fear, as well as trust. "Mijit Alu, how many of you want to live? Techuli, raise your hands." The villagers looked lost and then looked at one another. They didn't seem to know what Takuma was here for. "Alui Mandel Tetulu. If you want to live, raise your hands." Again, they all hesitated and just stared blankly. "Jisu, Lumi, Noitu, Yaji. This is all happening for a reason." "Ayo Liui, Philo, Kliu, Verte Tikul. We have angered and offended the one God." Some of them gasped and turned away, but this only made Takuma mad and less patient. "Hinnu, Ayoyi, Jin, Kintui. I know this is true because he sent me. Deyu, Jiulipi. Get used to it. Verti Tikul, Jamuye, Jamuye. The true God wants all of you, Takuma explained, and then something caught in his mind. He felt that the people in their ignorance were the true cost of this punishment. It was the people that had to change. Their minds were wrong and weak. "Hinlu, Jinul, give me the most valuable person here," he exclaimed. "Muin, Siul, I will save you," he yelled. He waited, and then about 10 people pointed to a handsome young man in a loincloth. He looked cold, but somehow he stopped himself from shivering. Takuma lifted his arm and waved him over. "Aioloi, Jin, come with me," Takuma said confidently. Gianoa gave her husband a quizzical look, but Takuma persisted and pulled on his hood, and the two men went into the severe downpour. Outside, it didn't take too long to get to the nearest floodwaters, and when he looked back, he was modestly surprised to see that he had a handful of followers, even in the rain. "Folu, young man, Yel, Nitu, Tohi, Viyu. Walk into the water and we will be saved." The young man looked at Takuma full of doubt and fear, but drew in a deep breath and stepped into the quickly deep surging floodwaters. Literally, before Takuma could blink, the young man was swept away and swallowed by the waters. Like bewildered, simple-minded people, Takuma later thought they looked up into the battering rain as if it would stop immediately. Even for Takuma, this wasn't supposed to be a sacrifice. It was a shaking of hands with the father, and Takuma was sure the boy was going to be spared. Eventually, they got out of the rain and went back into the large, dim hut. There was a new tense atmosphere, and finally one of the middle-aged men that looked like he had enough of this whole disaster exclaimed, "Chinta, Guli, Get out. We don't want you here. Takuma felt it was the right time to leave, and so he took Gianoa by the hand and questioned her faith in him as well. He came inside without knocking and saw about 15 people taking up about half of the open floor space. It was dim in here too, and the people were drier than at the one by the bank of the floodwaters. They looked at Takuma with empty expressions and looked away. In the corner, on the northwest quadrant, there was a huge store of foods, and it was slightly odd that it seemed the people were avoiding it or even looking in its directions. This fact somehow inspired Takuma, and Gianoa was giving him her attention. The people seemed to make her uncomfortable. Both of them were technically prim, but her people weren't as poor as his. However, he didn't think it was a matter of wealth or poverty that gave her an anxious expression. It was the desperation of it all. The massive rainfall outside brought Takuma back, and he cleared his throat. Aechu, bueniti ayu yui. I am here to save you, he exclaimed. This time he didn't care if they believed, though he knew that he couldn't screw this one up. There was an elderly woman lying on the cot on the right half of the floor with a small family tending to her. She was emaciated and seemed to be resting, though not peacefully. Takuma got his attention back and went on. Tijuki, hij jabibi verti tikul. Come with me, follow and serve the true God, he yelled. He didn't wait for support or inspiration. Jinjuleu, yunti, kumioli timan, sieluti, jija noto. Men, take all the food in the corner outside and burn it, Takuma demanded. To his surprise, about 5 men stood and went to the food store in the corner and brought all the food outside the front door by stacks and stacks, and then found some lighter fluid and doused the food in it in the rain. They lit a wooden torch inside and threw it on the food. It caught instantly, giving Takuma a reassuring warmth. He was sure this time the Father would show mercy. This was the plague that he would defeat because everyone knows food is all around, and it was just all a test and offered by the Father to come to him and serve. The food burnt to a crisp, and after hours and into the dead of night, the rain didn't let up at all. Not one bit. To make matters more severe, the elderly woman woke up. She coughed and spoke. Saniman, I can eat now. It drove a pain so deep in Takuma's heart that the embarrassment could have caused him to pass out. He looked at Gianoa and she looked at him in solid faith, and he felt like he could cry, but that would be an ultimate disrespect towards God. The hours went on, and the elderly woman said, Saniman, one more time before she died about 2 more hours into the early morning.